another edition of the Energy Week podcast. Ryan Ray alongside the one and only Dr. Energy herself, Ellen Wald. Ellen, how's it going today?
It is a very busy Monday morning and afternoon.
Yes, it is. Well, last week we talked about the polar vortex that was here and the hot humidity there. I've got to ask, what's the weather like in the great state of Florida today?
You know, it's funny. It was very warm up until yesterday evening, basically, and then we had a big temperature change, and now I think it was down in the 40s this morning. So we're back in normal temperatures. It was not supposed to be 89 degrees on Saturday.
You're out of the sweltering zone, if you will. Yeah, we're in the mid-60s here, but the winds, the winds in Texas, some days they can make a 65 kind of cool, and some days 65 can feel just right. So a lot to get to today's show, and first let's start off with a couple of tweets that came out here recently. We'll start off with someone near and dear to your part of the world, Senator Marco Rubio, who tweeted out, "The intel community must do more to isolate and punish the Maduro regime." And then he lists 3 ideas that he thinks are really good here. Seize assets of PdVSA and turn over to the legitimate government. Deny visas to regime officials and their families. Find the money that was stolen and return it to the people of Venezuela. And he's responding to a NBC tweet about Vice President Pence meeting with the Lima Group and a coalition about the crisis of Venezuela. Ellen, I saw you comment on this tweet, what brought my attention to it. First off, you are the resident scholar here and international expert. Can you please tell me who the international community is?
The international community. Well, so that could be anyone from the UN. A lot of times when people say international community, they actually mean the United Nations. However, the United Nations is not really in the business of seizing assets. They don't have mechanisms for that, as far as I understand. Could mean the World Bank, could mean the United States. It could mean anything you want it to mean, actually. Anything other than the little green men from space, because that would be the intergalactic community.
Big difference there. Big difference there. Okay, so, yeah, it's kind of vague. And just a side comment, with all of the stuff that U.S. foreign policy is involved with right now, wars and Russia investigations, it seems weird to call for the international community to come to do something with us. But that aside, he wants to seize the assets of PdVSA. Now, ConocoPhillips probably saw that and went, yeah, we need some...
Oh, That's probably what they were thinking. Really not what I should have said on the
air. Probably raised an eyebrow when they saw that. But what assets are we talking about here? Because, I mean, theoretically, and I don't know particularly how it works in Venezuela, but I'm presuming here that PdVSA could technically own the unproduced oil in the ground. I mean, so you're talking about assets. This could be you're talking about bulldozers, tractors, fences and houses. I mean, this is a super ambiguous statement.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, first of all, what is the law of Venezuela, and in particular, what are the incorporation documents for PdVSA say? And I know this is getting very technical into very specific businessy things, but it's actually really important when you talk about this stuff is how is this company formed, who has control, and from what I know, which is not a huge amount, but from what I've known, I've read, it seems that the National Assembly. If you believe that Maduro is an illegitimate ruler, then control of the board of PdVSA should revert to the National Assembly. That's not necessarily Guaido. Okay, he's declared himself the new president, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he is the legitimate president. According to Venezuela's law, I believe it should be the National Assembly as a whole, and the National Assembly can appoint a new board for PdVSA and so on and so forth. But when you're talking about just the assets of PdVSA, I mean, exactly what are you talking about? Does he mean the financial assets that are held outside of Venezuela? Does he mean, when I read this tweet, the first thing I thought of that came to my mind was in the 1950s when Iran seized control of the Iranian oil company that was what BP was called before it was BP, the Anglo-Iranian oil company's assets in Iran. They basically sent in the army. They sent in men with guns to the Abadan refinery, and you had this, like, if you could picture it, with these, Iranian men with guns coming in, and the last British people are basically getting on boats and fleeing the refinery, which is on the water, right as they're coming to seize the control of the refinery. And that was it. Like, Britain never got control back of that refinery. And that's what I'm picturing here is, does he really mean send men with guns in to occupy the oil fields? Does he mean say there are PdVSA tankers around the world? Does he mean that, any country that has a PdVSA tanker docked at its port should basically commandeer it? Are we going to send, like, privateers around the globe to commandeer them at sea?
Right. Right.
There's a lot going on there that I don't think is particularly well thought through. And then plus, once you do that, then what does it mean to turn control over them to the legitimate government? Does that mean, what does that mean?
It doesn't mean anything. That's the thing. And I think the statement that kind of summarizes that this tweet means nothing: find the money they have stolen and return it to the people of Venezuela. I mean, I just would say, just from a government overreach standpoint, listen, we've made it very clear. I made my position very clear, at least. I am for people of Venezuela. I want nothing but the best for them and all of that. So I'm not anti-people of Venezuela here. I'm just saying to try to find the money they've stolen. And you talk about investigations and years and years and years to go through all of the money wires and I mean, good gosh, that's never going to happen. It's not even a realistic proposition here. But
no, the only thing you would basically do is you would just commandeer their bank accounts at present. You're not going to find that money.
No, exactly. And then people would challenge you that it was stolen and this, that, and the other. So anyways.
Plus, can't forget, you've got creditors. PdVSA has legitimate creditors, okay? Like Russia and China. Are you going to say, Russia and China, why don't you go commandeer the stuff and, you can take it as collateral or whatever, or, you're never going to collect on PdVSA, so just take their tankers. I mean, is that what he means? I mean, that you can't just have that happen without any kind of at least semblance of a legitimate process and a legitimate, like, a court decision. Like, you want to do something like this, you go through the courts. Like, if there's a bankruptcy in a company, it goes to the courts, and then the court decides, how to divide up the assets to the company's creditors. You want to do that? Do that.
Right. Okay, let's turn to the next tweet of the day, and you have a piece on Forbes, which we'll link to in the show notes. And the tweet is from President Trump. We didn't lead with Trump, which was a mistake, but we will go to him now. Oil prices getting too high. OPEC, please relax and take it easy. World cannot take a price hike. Fragile. Or, as they said in the Christmas movie, Fragile, because it's Italian. Sorry, it's my bad humor for the day. I just love that movie. Ellen, we have elections coming up here in the United States sooner than we'd like to admit. And I just got a feeling, if you had a moderate Democrat that's a serious contender for Trump, and someone who's maybe not for the Green New Deal, if you will, that they will and should weaponize these tweets against Trump, because I don't know how this is not seen as slapping his base in the face repeatedly, because oil prices are not high right now, especially WTI.
No, they're not high at all. I mean, I've been kind of like chewing this over in my mind all day, and I'm wondering if that's just a bad thing. I mean, one of the things that I argued the last time that we saw a Trump tweet for lower oil prices, or about how great low oil prices were, was that he seems to have a very singular focus on manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And in some respects, and I do kind of see that if you really want to assume the best and assume a logical progression, manufacturing jobs are more stable, you could say, than, say, oil industry jobs. So the oil industry tends to go through a lot of, it's a boom and bust kind of industry. And it happens. And manufacturing tends to be much more, you build a plant, someone works there for 30 years, it's less of a boom and bust. So maybe he sees manufacturing as just a much more stable component of the economy. However, that's not where our economy really is right now. And if you look at during the Obama years, basically the largest source of economic growth for the U.S. economy was the oil sector. So you don't want to kick the hand, bite the hand that feeds you.
Yeah.
Right? That's it. Don't bite the hand that feeds you so much. The oil industry is still providing a huge amount of growth for the U.S. economy. It's a significant part of our GDP. It's a huge component of I don't know if I should say huge component of our exports, but it's a pretty significant component of our exports, and it's really changing our relationship, in fact, with a lot of countries out there. And then when oil prices are just beginning to recover from that huge drop in December, you really want to kick them while they're down. On the other hand, another component could be gasoline prices are going up this week. And that's really not due to anything other than the fact that it's refinery maintenance season, plus some due to this Venezuela issue, which is happening because of the sanctions that the Trump administration put on Venezuelan oil. So, I don't know. I don't see the drop that we saw this morning in oil, is 3% at least.
Right.
I don't see that as kind of kicking off any kind of long down spin, particularly because a lot of the hedge funds have really placed these long bets. And so I think it'll probably continue to go up.
Yeah.
OPEC's not going to relax.
Right. Well, I wonder here if maybe in Trump's mind, he's thinking, you know what, low gas prices means that it ramps the economy up, which means that eventually the price will have to just go up because we'll increase demand so much. I mean, I'm not sure I necessarily fully agree with all that logic, but maybe in his mind that's what he's thinking. Okay, if I keep the gas prices down, people will invest, they'll big infrastructure, stuff like that. The consumers, the investors will feel better about the potential to do projects. Do you think maybe part of that's in his mind, and he's hoping that people will invest into infrastructure, into business, into big projects that require a lot of fossil fuels, and then eventually the prices will rise, and at that time he'll say, well, look, we kept the prices low and now the prices are high, but that was because of this.
Now that's a really interesting thing I hadn't thought of. That's possible. I do think that I also think he likes needling these OPEC. I think he likes that. And the thing is that OPEC is not going to respond this time. Last time, Saudi Arabia responded, and it was a huge mistake. They're not going to just bring their production up at this point just because he says. Because the last time they did that, it didn't work out well for them. So I don't think they're going to change anything. I think the only thing we'll see is possibly some more waivers for the Iranian exports, which I don't think are going to make a huge deal at this point. I think most people have a basic idea of how much oil's, coming from Iran.
Right. And how much does this have to tie in with maybe the U.S. and Saudis within Yemen? And Trump feels like because he is helping them out there, that he can kind of prod the Saudi/OPEC.
Oh, I think he definitely thinks that. That's a very good point. I think he definitely thinks that, we're helping you out in Yemen. You owe us. There's definitely a quid pro quo there. And I think if he gets really concerned, look, oil prices they're not even much above 60. They're not you really don't need to start to worry until WTI hits 70 or 75 even. Right. So I would chill out. I would let the market do its thing.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to claim yourself as a free market guy. Then you're throwing around your presidential weight to influence the market.
Here's the thing. By all intents and purposes, a tweet should not affect oil prices. So what I think is actually going on here is it's those algos. It's these computer algorithms are picking up on this stuff, and then they start to sell, and then other people see that and start to sell, and it's it's a thing. But there's no reason for oil to drop.
No.
because he tweeted it. There's no like logical reason, like, oh, Trump tweeted, now Saudi Arabia is going to increase production. There's no logical thing. So I think it's a computer thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's a blip. And you know what? Computers like volatility. Traders like volatility. If it doesn't move, they can't make any money. So
That's right. That's right. Speaking of making money, let's go to the Wall Street Journal. Frackers face harsh reality as Wall Street backs away. And the subheadline here is Key Lifeline for Smaller Operators Fades as losses pile up and prospects dim for big investment returns. Ellen, one of the things I've said many, many times now is long-term in an area like the Permian, especially if you have a downturn hit sooner rather than later, I think you will see the Exxons, the Chevrons, the companies that can do all three phases of the game move in, take control of large acreage stakes because they can make money, whereas Ryan's Wildcat and company can't. But on the flip side, we've seen headlines like this before. Hey, Wall Street's walking away, and then the price jumps up a little bit. Next thing you know, Wall Street's knocking on the door, ready to loan out money.
yeah, exactly. And I really wonder if that's more what we're going to see here. I mean, we keep hearing they're not making any money. They're not profitable. Wall Street's going to pull back funding. They're bearing down on the companies to, cut their budgets more and okay, but say it's April and WTI is pushing high 60s. What are they going to do then? They really going to walk away from that?
Right.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so either. And, I think part of this, you talk about the algos with the trading, I think also part of this news cycle is brought on by the SEC. I guess it's the SEC that requires the quarterly reporting. So you got these quarterly reporting comes on, and it's like, well, Continental, their fourth quarter spending was up almost 10% higher than analyst expectations, and I hate reading that stuff. I mean, it's like, okay, well, it's a quarter of the year. Their spending was up. Well, why was their spending up? Does their spending up for a good reason, for a bad reason? I mean, just saying that your spending's up doesn't mean anything. I mean, it can mean a lot of things, and so you have these every quarter where you're trying to hit these projections, you're trying to hit these marks, and you kind of talk about having a free market. Well, it makes it where the market is kind of not rigged, but set to be, well, you got to hit these milestone markers, or guess what? We're gonna slap you on the wrist here, and then we're gonna buy more of your stock when we devalue it. So I don't know. Just to me, these headlines are always kind of. I do think there's a legit possibility of the big companies taking over eventually, but these headlines always kind of concern me because they're generated on 10% in the last quarter. What does that even mean?
Yeah, and I think it's also. I mean, I think if oil prices did suddenly take a real nosedive and went back into the 40s, or maybe then I think that this might be this might be something more significant, and that we would definitely see more bankruptcies and acquisitions and so on and so forth. But I'm like you said, I'm not sure that the evidence here necessarily shows what the headline is saying.
Well, and I guess the final thing for that is, how much of this. So you got the kind of the reality that there is probably some banks who want to pull back, but also how much of this is Wall Street putting pressure on the E&P companies actually just to run the business the way that they want them to run it, which is roll back your drilling expansion, return on profits, things like that.
Yeah, well, we all know that Wall Street knows how to run everything in the country better than the people who actually do it.
Hey, there you go. Halliburton breaks ground on oilfield chemical plant in Saudi Arabia. This article is by my good friend Sergio Chapa at the Houston Chronicle, a frequent guest on the Texas Oil Gas podcast.
Oh, we should have had him on ours to talk about his article then.
I didn't realize it was him until I just read this, but we can get Sergio on here for sure. He does great work. So
it'll be really cool to interview him about this because I thought it was really interesting. We know Halliburton does a lot of work in Saudi Arabia to begin with, but this is a really big really big project in Saudi Arabia, and it's going to be so they had the ceremony at Jubail's Plaskin Park, where I've actually been. It's basically it looks like the picture in the article, which is basically an expanse of desert with not much there, but they have this kind of like area that they've designated that's very close to all of these chemical plants that are producing a lot of the base components for other chemicals. And when I was there, I think a year and a half ago, they were talking a lot about how they've built, I was visiting Sadara, which is a joint venture between Dow Chemical and Aramco, and they produce a lot of kind of certain specialty-based chemicals that are used to produce other things like detergent and foam that goes in your couches and all sorts of stuff. And they showed me this entire swath of land that had been designated as this Plaschem park, where they want manufacturers who use these components to come in and and build there. And so it's kind of interesting to see these things taking place. And I don't know, I think it's very, so apparently this plant is going to make chemicals that will actually be used to stimulate and boost production in oil wells. What does that make you think of? Makes me think of fracking, possibly.
Well, I was about to say, we just covered a story today. ExxonMobil is bringing in Microsoft to help them with data analytics to increase their well productivity. So, so I can definitely.
So, and then they're going to also make chemicals to be used in pipelines and refineries, and it's kind of interesting. Oilfield chemical manufacturing reaction plant is what they're calling it. But it also is. I think it also gives us a sense of what kind of development is really going on in Saudi Arabia. We see a lot of headlines all about tech stuff and movie theaters or Six Flags Great Adventure theme parks, but none of these are actually built, or some of the movie theaters are. But when you get down to it, where are the big plants being done? They're being done. Saudi Arabia's key industry is still oil and chemicals, and that's where a lot of the big investment and a lot of the big projects are still.
So, just out of curiosity here, how much work does Saudi Arabia, Aramco rather, do with Halliburton? I mean, obviously Halliburton's number one, number two in the world.
They do a lot.
Is it common for them to be down there working?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think this is probably the first actual chemical plant that they're building. Okay. But Halliburton Saudi Arabia definitely does a lot with Halliburton.
I would assume so, but building a plant, that's a big step. I mean, it's interesting because I'm guessing the Saudis will have some ownership of this. I'm assuming it's.
Oh yeah, I think it's a joint. No, it's Saudi Arabia. I think Aramco owns it, and Halliburton is just building it. I don't. I don't.
I thought.
You know what? I don't know. It doesn't say whether this is a joint venture or not. So maybe we should ask Sergio next time he's on.
Yeah, I will. I'll tell you what.
Because it does not say, and that is a really good question.
Yeah, the way I read the tweet from the Halliburton executive there, this is a strategic targeted expansion to accelerate our fast-growing specialty. And the Houston Chronicle just slapped up an ad on my thing, so I can't read it now. Oh, there it is. Our specialty chemical business. And so I assumed it was their plant. And it says, we chose Saudi Arabia for this plant because it provides an advantage location for us to deliver our value proposition of superior service and chemical applications expertise to Eastern Hemisphere customers because our strong 80-year success in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So I took that to mean that they might own it, but I'd assume that the Saudis would have some skin in the game.
Yeah, so that's So that's really, really interesting. So so thinking about that quote, it definitely seems like there's that they're coming in, they want to build in this Plaschem park because they want access to some of the stuff that's being made there, and then they're planning to ship it out, which is really interesting, which is actually much more in line with what Saudi Arabia is looking for, because they want to be producing chemicals, and then they want to be sending those they want people to come in, produce chemicals, and send them along to Asia, because they see themselves, and this is part of their whole marketing thing, they see themselves as very well situated geographically and strategically for for that it's better to produce the chemicals in Saudi Arabia and send them off. So that does make me think that it actually belongs to Halliburton. I wouldn't be surprised if Aramco has some skin in the game, particularly because they probably got all sorts of discounted energy and all sorts of stuff, and discounted land and water and access to build there.
Okay, let's move on now to Yahoo Finance. The world's largest energy trader says oil prices are set to rally further as OPEC output cuts and American sanctions on Iran and Venezuela cause a shortage of low-quality heavy crudes refineries rely on. From Yahoo, which is from Bloomberg, actually. Ellen, what do you think?
Well, they clearly didn't account for that Trump tweet this morning, but I think the point still stands. And this is a point that, honestly, and I've been following this on Twitter, which is obviously not the be-all and end-all of the discussion on oil prices, but I think is a pretty significant component of it. And there seem to be the people who are saying, look, this is a big deal. There's going to be a shortage of heavy crude, and there are a lot of refiners out there that still need a lot of heavy crude, and this is going to be a problem, and it's going to cause oil prices to go up. And then you have these people on the other side who are like, well, heavy crude isn't used so much, and it's actually really difficult. Plus, there are other places you get it from, so it's really not going to affect oil prices all that much. And I saw that coming from the EIA, actually, coming from some certain people who are, I don't know. And so it does seem that there's this divide between whether it's actually going to matter or whether it's not. And Vitol is saying, hey, we think it matters, and we think there's going to be a lot of price action because of it. I love the description, though, of this. It says, the guy from Vitol said this, as the who's who of the oil industry descend on London for the annual International Petroleum Week of conferences, meetings, and cocktail parties. Don't forget those cocktail parties. Those are probably more important than the meetings and the conferences.
Yes. Well, yeah, it goes back to this heavy, light debate, and I don't know. I was reading some stuff on this last week after our episode, and the camps it's like Republicans and Democrats. It really is. I mean, like they are so entrenched in these positions. It's really hard to tell whether or not. I mean, obviously, listen, we got to blend it, so I'm not denying that. But it's really hard to tell where the line is of how right one side is or another, because they are really. I mean, the folks that are in that camp of crude quality matters, they serious about it.
And I do think it does matter, but I do think that it's an ongoing. I think it's probably neither. I think it's somewhere in the middle, because you do have a lot of refineries in the U.S. that have done upgrades to make them be able to process a lot more light crude because it's available, and that's great. And I remember a couple of years ago, I really argued very, very strongly that we needed to build more refineries in America, and we need to build ones that could process the light crude more, more efficiently. And it turned out that maybe we didn't really need more refineries. It's just that the refineries that we did have needed to switch. And we probably could do with more refineries, but, I think that I was probably not correct in saying, in how badly I thought we needed more refineries, because it does seem like we can process a lot more light crude than we used to. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm kind of in the middle, but I guess I do think that the market was underestimating the need for the heavy crude. I think that it matters. I don't know. I think Vitol is probably more right than not, but
yeah, it definitely matters. It's just that it's kind of like anytime a CEO, the people who are on their crude quality kick, anytime a CEO of a big company says, "Well, we can't process all this light sweet crude," you see 5 million pieces and articles and tweets about that. But then when Exxon expands or Chevron buys a new plant to process light sweet crude, it's like, well, why are they doing that if there's not the demand for it? Obviously, these guys think that there's some kind of demand, and I'm not saying that they're right. They could be wrong, just like you were wrong and I've been wrong. We're all wrong. But there is something to be said about the fact that we could be at capacity now, but the fact that these big companies think that there's a reason to invest in this, there's something there. Whatever it is, I guess time will tell. So that's I guess my frustration is like, well, because I've asked people, I said, well, what's the deal with this? You say this, we got too much of this stuff, and these guys are doubling down on this light sweet crude. Well, they just want to be part of the club. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe. I mean,
part of the club. I mean, really?
I'm serious. They want to be part of the club, or want to be sought among their friends as having a position or something like that. It was like, okay, I mean, I guess that could be it, but I would hope that they're doing a little bit better with their money. So, yeah. So, anyways, we talked about oil prices a little bit, but this is from Friday. We'll go back to the long time ago of last week. Oil prices rise this week on OPEC supply cuts and U.S.-China trade hopes, and then Trump comes out with a baseball bat Monday and just
smashes the whole thing. Bam, that's it.
The whole thing. And, I woke up this morning, I saw a headline, I don't know if it was on my iPhone or where, I cannot find it now, and it was saying that something, it was echoing the Trump-China sentiment here, and then, of course, that all fell apart by noon, so...
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because I thought it was first because oil prices were going up, and it's just always interesting to see what people attribute it to. I don't recognize the second person the first person on the video, but I do recognize the second guy from Clipper Data, and I think a lot of we did see a big jump in prices around the 20th of February. But one of the other things that we're seeing right now is I think a lot of the increase last week also had to do with the fact that Saudi Arabia basically said, look, we had to take this big oil field that produces a lot of oil offline to do some electrical repairs, and we're going to be cutting. And they said they're cutting production. They have this big refinery, and they're taking that refinery offline to do maintenance in March. So they're going to be cutting both their production and their exports. I think it's all tied in. It's not necessarily one of these, like, initially when they made that announcement, I thought that, whoa, is Saudi Arabia trying to be the swing producer again? That doesn't really work out well for them. And then I heard about these technical issues, and I realized that's really where it's coming from. But I do think we saw the market reacting.
Okay, let's go to something a little bit more outside of what we talk about normally here. We don't talk about a lot about Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi state-owned oil company signs $4 billion deal with KKR BlackRock. Now, this was an interesting article here. I don't follow Abu Dhabi or that kind of the Middle Eastern investments and what's going on there nearly as close as you do. Did this deal surprise you, or has this been the work for a while?
Yeah, I really wasn't all that aware of it. I thought it was really interesting that they signed this huge deal with KKR and BlackRock, and they're going to form this new entity called ADNOC Oil Pipelines. And they're going to lease the company's interest in 18 pipelines transporting crude oil and condensates across ADNOC's upstream concessions for a 23-year period. And they want to make other investments as a result. It just seemed like it's a very interesting deal that was going on. And I thought it was interesting that BlackRock and KKR were really interested in this pipeline business. Apparently, so the ADNOC Oil Pipelines Company is going to be majority owned by ADNOC, which is the national oil company of Abu Dhabi. And they're going to collect 60% of the revenue during the lease period. Then 40% is going to be held collectively by a consortium of funds managed by BlackRock and KKR. And we're getting like so many investment fund, this on that.
Right.
But it does seem like KKR and BlackRock think that there's money to be made in the pipeline business, at least in Abu Dhabi, which is interesting.
Right. So the 23-year period, is there some kind of, some of these foreign countries will have like a Grow Green, or South Africa has a 2030, I think, or 2040 initiative, and is 23 years? Is that some kind of initiative time period that? Is there any significance to 23 years from now in Abu Dhabi?
I don't think so, but I don't know.
Okay, I didn't know they had
not as far as I know.
Right. Okay.
I know Bahrain has one of these like transformation plans.
Okay.
But I don't know if Abu Dhabi has one.
Yeah. Okay. This 23 years is just a kind of a almost at face value a random number. But I don't really care one way or another. Well,
It's also though interesting because ADNOC is kind of like spinning off its pipeline division. I guess you could interpret it like that. And they're basically, it's like they're spinning it off and they got investors into it, which is weird. And I guess they're not like, I don't know, they could have like IPO ADNOC Oil Pipelines Company at some point. I don't know. And apparently, here's some interesting factoids, though. The company has 18 pipelines and a total length of over 466 miles and a capacity of 13 million barrels a day.
And so the co-CEO, I didn't know there was such a thing, but co-CEO of KKR, Henry Kravis, said that with this transaction as a precedent, we believe there is substantial potential to do even more. So where would that be? Does he think in Abu Dhabi, or they're going to try to expand into other Middle Eastern countries here, or what would be the play here?
I think they want to build more pipelines around there, probably. I mean, if Abu Dhabi's going to increase oil production, or they want to, send product places. I mean, right now, and this is like a big question that I've been looking at. Abu Dhabi is actually the UAE is actually importing a lot of oil from Iran. I'm not really sure what they're doing with it and where it's going, but it's some sort of like maybe pass through to somewhere else. But I think there's a lot that Abu Dhabi wants to do in terms of storing oil and being like an oil storage place and in terms of the transportation and logistics. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do try to spin off this company into other areas, building pipelines for Bahrain maybe, or for Qatar if they can ever get over their, weird issues.
Okay. All right, let's turn now to our final piece of the day from your favorite publication, The Financial Post.
Yeah, I don't know if we really, how up to talking about this I feel after I got skewered on Friday. I'll fill our listeners in. On Friday, I was asked by CTV, great Canadian television, news service, to come on and talk about this ruling of the National Energy Board, which basically approved the Trans Mountain Pipeline, and which basically means that they have to send it to what the Canadians call the federal government to give final approval. And when I was talking on the program, I mistakenly referred to Alberta as a state instead of a province, and I promptly got hate mail from Canadians. So I apologize, Canadians. I know that you guys have provinces, not states. It was Friday afternoon, and I am sorry. I will make better effort to use the appropriate language in the future.
On behalf of the Energy Week podcast, we express our full condolences to any Canadian that may or might be offended in the future over Ellen's comments.
On the other hand, the interesting part of this ruling was basically this. So the big issue with the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which, by the way, there already is a pipeline that goes from like Edmonton to Vancouver, to the port there. There already is a pipeline that does that. This is just going to build another pipeline to transport more oil. And the biggest issue that they're talking about is the effect that the increase of marine traffic would have on the marine life in that part of British Columbia. And what the National Energy Board found was that there was going to be an increase in marine traffic regardless of whether they built the pipeline. And I think that their decision was basically saying, like, well, it's going to increase no matter what, so we can recommend that this pipeline be built and in turn get a whole lot of money and commitments from Trans Mountain to do stuff to help mitigate the effects of this increased marine traffic on the ecosystems of that area. So that seemed to be their main justification for it. Doesn't mean it's going to be built, but if it is built, it does mean that more Canadian oil will be shipped to the West Coast and could go to Asia as opposed to going down to the Gulf of Mexico.
It's going to be a travesty if the Canadians get this pipeline done before we get the
Keystone.
I'm just kidding, Canadians. I'm just kidding. It's a little joke. Calm down. It would be a travesty, but I am joking. National emergency or something for us. The Canadians out-governmented us. But Well, they need to get done, and so hopefully it says they one guy was quoted in the article saying it's a re-victory.
Victory. Well, the thing is, like, we all know, look, it's really not a good idea. Oh, this was the other thing I had this week. So I think I wrote something about how, oh, yeah, I was writing about, so the premier of Alberta, Rachel Notley, came up with this scheme to basically rent railroad cars, and she's going to like have the province buy oil from the oil producers and then ship them in these rented railroad cars down to the Gulf. And she claims that it's a sure bet, it's going to make money, and we can get the oil out of storage in Alberta. And people were like, are you really sure you can like make up that money? You really want to get in the oil transportation business? But so I wrote some piece in it, and I said, transporting oil by rail is really just dangerous. It's dangerous for a lot of reasons, but it's more dangerous, and pipelines are a lot safer. So I got this weird email. I hope this person's not listening. This person who is trying to tell me that it's really not bad to transport light oil by rail car because it's a lot less flammable. But I thought they were missing the whole point of it's not just about something exploding. It's also about a spill. And no matter how heavy that oil is, if the rail car tips over and something happens, that oil is going to spill out all over the place. And they don't have safeguards like they do in pipelines to shut off and if there's ever a spill detected. And I didn't respond because it was a little weird, but there are a lot of dangers, and it's not just flammability.
Right. Yeah, and I think I've said it on here before. I know I said it on other places. If you want to go the safest and most environmentally friendly route, pipelines. That's it. That's just it. And as far as efficiency goes, listen, you can make money shipping it via rail down there or not, but the pipeline companies who are in the business of making money have found that it's more efficient to put it in a pipeline than to carry it by truck or train. So, even if you could make money, you're losing money by not doing the pipeline.
I agree, and it's interesting because I always had this idea. You think, like common sense wise, that if there are no pipelines, then they're going to transport it by rail, and like you should invest in railroad companies, right? Turns out that like railroad companies are so hard to be profitable. They just like never make a profit. It's very difficult. So they were mostly criticizing her because she basically said there's basically no risk in this, and all these people were like, you can't say that. Like they were like, if I said that there was like no risk in a financial thing, I would like lose my license. So they were most upset with the fact that she just seemed to be assuming that there was no risk when they're both risk of transporting oil by rail car, but also a financial risk that they wouldn't recoup their costs.
Well, it's fitting to start with a politician saying something stupid and end with a politician saying something stupid. It works out well for
Please don't tell me Canadian government officials aren't politicians. They are.
Oh, gracious. That's too much. Well, to all of our friends up in Canada, we love you. We love you. Even if Trump doesn't love you, we love you. Okay, Ellen, it's Monday, so long week ahead. Where will you be?
I'm going to be on Forbes, definitely, again this week, and also investing.com.
Okay. And Text One Guys podcast was recorded this morning, so it will be out. And I sent Sergio a text while we were discussing about the Halliburton ownership, and he was going to double check. So I'll see if we can. Yep, I'll see if we can either get him on the show next week or at least get some quotes from him for the show. So, okay, Ellen, anything else before we get out here today?
Not really. Everyone should have a great week, and hopefully spring will be around the corner for most of you.
Yep, and to the listeners, thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.